So for this chapter, we're going to start actually producing the song. And the first step of my process is always making a techno kick. So that's what I'm going to be showing you how to do. It's always the first step because in my opinion, the kick is the most important part about a techno track. If it's not hitting right, if it's not grooving right, the rest of your song just isn't going to sound that great. The kick has to have the right punch, character, and rumble. And all of those elements are going to dictate the groove of your entire track. I'm going to show you my favorite way to make these kind of peak time kicks and just techno kicks in general. This is one of my favorite methods I've been using lately, and that is the kick builder method. The kick builder method is essentially a technique where you take a sample pack that contains all the individual building blocks of a techno kick as samples, and you stack them on top of each other and you build a custom techno kick. I love using this method because it just gives you so much control over the kick and all the different parts of a kick. We actually just released a techno kick builder pack called the Underworld Techno Kick Builder, and that's exactly what we're going to be using today. So I'm going to start by making 5 audio tracks and we're going to group them. We'll call this group Kick Designer, and then we can call this first track Mid Punch, call the second track Low Punch. We'll call the third track Top Kick, call the fourth track Rumble, and then we'll call the fifth track Character. Next, let's zoom in and we're going to highlight a quarter note and make a loop by pressing Command L. We can expand these tracks out a bit just so we have a more zoomed in view of what we're looking at. So after we've made a quarter note loop, I'm going to go into our pack and let's look at some of these mid punch kicks. So these are going to be like it sounds. It's going to be our mid punch. It's not going to dominate too much of the top end, and it doesn't really have a ton of low end energy. This is going to be great for the front of the kick. So I really like the way this one sounds. So we can drag that into our mid punch layer. And if we solo the kick designer group, we can press play. And I like how that sounds. Before we go any further though, I am going to add a limiter to the group just to make sure when we go to render out the final kick, we're not clipping. So after the mid punch, I'm actually going to take care of the rumble next. So we'll go back into our pack and let's look at these rumbles. So I really like 7. It feels like it has a little bit of groove to it and it's not too tonal, which I prefer. So we'll drag that in and then let's play them both together. Right off the bat, that sounds really good. And that's why I like using this Kick Builder sample pack. All of these samples were created to be played together and it just sounds really good. So after that, the next thing I like to do is look at some of these top kicks. So I really like the sound of this. And it adds a little bit more to the top, but I'm not sure I quite like it when I play it together. So let's look for more. Now we're definitely getting closer with that one. It definitely adds like a clickier top end to the kick, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. So something else we can do to accent that even more is like put an EQ on and just keep boosting the highs. Now I feel like the kick is really punching through. So if we turn this off, I really like how that sounds. And while we have the EQ on here, let's just make sure there's no lows and not really a ton of mids coming through on this top kick. And we can turn it down a tiny bit. And again, that's why I like using the kick builder, is because I have control over each individual component of this kick. So while we're here, we can sort of fade out this mid punch tail a little. And you can see that there's some like low frequency content in there. We can put an EQ on here and EQ some of that out. We don't want to take away too much and try to be too surgical, but a little bit helps. So now let's look at some of these low punch kicks. I don't always use these, but sometimes it really helps add a nice like low subby punch to the front of the kick. So let's take this punch 9. And something that I also like to do is sort of shift this back. So if we look at our reference kick, you can see that the transient, or the front of the kick, is like a ton of high frequencies. It's not like a low sine wave like a 909 punch would be. So sometimes I do like to shift this back so the transient of the kick isn't too subby. And you can really hear the difference when you turn it off and on. It was sort of lacking that punch that would really hit you in the chest when the kick comes through on a large system, you know? So that's why I like to layer this in sometimes. And you might introduce some phasing issues, but when we go to render the kick out, we're gonna address that. So that is already sounding really good. And the last thing I wanna add is the character. So if we go into this reverb gate folder, we have a lot of great samples that you can just drag and drop in, and it'll add so much groove and character to your kick. So let's just start by dragging a few of these in, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn this down. I'm not really liking that. That's cool, but not really what I'm looking for here. That one's not bad, so that's 15. Let's just keep that in mind. Oh, I kind of like this one. It's sort of like that low mid. That's cool. That's cool. Okay, I like that. So I'm gonna make another audio track because I might want to add another character layer in there. Ooh, that one's nice too, and that one has like a groove to it. So if we turn these two character tracks off and play it, I feel like the character tracks just add so much to the kick. So that's why I love taking like a kick builder approach, is you just have so much control over the individual parts of the kick. So now that we've finished designing our kick, I'm gonna make a new audio track, and I'm gonna set the input to be the kick designer. Then I'm gonna record enable the track, and I'm gonna press record. So I don't really love the way this kick looks right off the bat. I think that it could be more compressed and more processed, which is fine. I don't think we're in a bad spot by any means, but I think there's still some work to do. So let's go back to our kick designer, and something that I like to do is add a drum bus. I'm gonna add this before the limiter. I just love the way the drum bus sounds. It just really beefs up the kick and adds a lot of warmth to it. So let's go ahead and we'll resample that and see what it looks like. Now, I think that is starting to look a little bit better. I think the last thing I might do is just turn up the limiter a bit. Now let's record that and see what it looks like. So I think this looks really good. I think it sounds great, but I think it's also good to visually check things. It's most important to use your ears first, but it's definitely good to visually check things as well. So if we're looking at this kick, there's definitely some phasing and some imperfections going on, but that is really actually what makes a techno kick like a beautiful thing. You don't want like a perfect sine wave, because then it's just not gonna sound rumbly. When the kick is phasing and inconsistent, that is what sort of creates the rumble. So I think this sounds really good. And now that we have our kick rendered to an audio file, we can easily just copy and paste it throughout our song or put it in a sampler. Whether you want to use audio or MIDI, it doesn't really matter. So that's what we're going to do in the next chapter, is write the rest of our drums and try to create like an outline or skeleton of our entire track using those drums.